Hello, my name is Kanissa Fumena and I am the curriculum developer for Rethinking Science Education. This is a website that I started mainly to help teachers and educators be able to increase engagement in their classroom and also learn more about culturally responsive teaching. Today I'm going to teach you about how to increase engagement in your classrooms in a very simple and simplistic way, because as teachers we really spend a lot of time developing, keeping track of our students, creating lesson plans, along with all the other duties that are required in our classroom. So I want to make sure that we are, as teachers, are spending our time wisely, and then also increasing student academic performance in your classrooms. So I have a couple of tips to share with you today about how to increase engagement in your classroom. Now, for the past 7 years of my career, I have been struggling and kind of thinking and processing how I can increase engagement with my students. It's not an easy task, so I want to make sure that it's easy for teachers, especially new teachers who are coming into the classroom. The key thing and the premise behind this video is because in order for students to learn, they need to be motivated and engaged in what you're teaching them. They cannot learn from you if they're not really motivated and they don't want to really learn the material that you're learning. This is where we get different students reacting to the content differently. Maybe it might be behaviorally, maybe they might be skipping class, they might be complaining about the class, things like that. That's mostly some of the things that I see at the high school level. But we want students to be able to learn, so it's very important to get student feedback. Student feedback is something that you can collect with a simple worksheet that covers some of the things that students might like asking them what things are they interested in, what are they interested in doing in the future, what did they like in other classes, and also asking them what did they do outside of school. And these types of survey questions will definitely help you be able to understand your students and also kind of highlight what would actually allow them to be motivated in your class. Now, this is not a foolproof method. Students, respond to different things for different reasons. You might teach something brand new and they might be like, yes, I'm really into this. And sometimes you might teach something new and they might be like, oh my God, why am I learning this? So the survey basically serves as kind of like a beginning kind of starter place for you to kind of think about your lessons in a way that helps your students be engaged. So usually what I do is I have this kind of survey in the beginning of the school year and my students take it and I put it in a file. So every time I develop a lesson or modify a lesson at this point, especially for veteran teachers, we're modifying lessons every year. I basically look at this form and I try to understand what my students actually enjoy doing. So one example of this is one of my students who really enjoys sports, and he was taking my Algebra 1 class. And I really wanted to make my Algebra 1 class really hands-on for him because he really struggled with being in a classroom atmosphere, and it kind of manifested behaviorally. So the first thing that I did was I kind of connected some of the sports, like he liked to play lacrosse, and I created a unit that was like a sports unit involved in like calculating linear equations, based on lacrosse. And the student really responded to this lesson mainly because it was hands-on. It was something that he really enjoyed, and then it also made him understand how the math applies to this unit as well. So it was very easy for him to sit down and understand the math aspect. And then one thing that I didn't really kind of foresee was the fact that when he was playing lacrosse is that he was kind of thinking about the math while he was playing one of his games. So that was really something that really connected him and brought him into the lesson and helped him learn more about algebra and connecting it to lacrosse. The second thing that is very important is that you build relationships with your students and you understand your students very well. This kind of connects to the first thing I mentioned, which was basically finding out what your students are interested in. If you don't know your students, you can't teach them, and they're not going to respond to you. So what you really need to do is really focus on really understanding your students, mainly by going out after class, and hanging out with them in the cafeteria, going to a game, really connecting them to show your students that they really and genuinely care. And then they will remember that, and they'll bring that to the classroom. And they'll have a different vibe. So I really believe in the relationship-based approach, and I think that all teachers should definitely try to get to know their students on a deeper level. The third thing that is very important is all of those other things, the first two things that I mentioned, also connect to the lesson planning piece. Now, I developed a lesson plan, which is a student-centered lesson plan that focuses on student engagement. So students really have their own kind of way of developing the lesson in a student-centered lesson plan, because it allows them to actually see the content and basically work through and critically think about the content. I'm going to include the lesson plan document right below this video so that you have access to it. But really, I wanted to kind of connect all of the important aspects of having a student-centered classroom into this lesson plan. Mainly because as a teacher, it doesn't come right away, right? So if you have a lesson plan that actually forces you to get your students engaged and get them thinking critically, it's very important. So it makes it a lot easier as well. So the first part of the lesson plan is literally a question, right? All lesson plans start with an essential question. What will students be answering by completing this question? So that's the first part. The second part is basically having the students explore some aspect of the lesson on their own. So this is kind of like the hook in traditional lesson plans. But this part actually is where you give some students some scaffolding. Say if you give students a bunch of pictures, or you have them watch a video, or you introduce a really controversial question, and students work together and really grapple with it. And you're not teaching during this part of the lesson, because the students are later going to basically teach themselves or think through the problem on their own. So the second part of the lesson plan basically is where they're starting to think about the question deeply. This is where they're starting to work in groups. This is where they're starting to really think and research the question, the essential question, and they're working towards creating a product at the end. Then the third part of the lesson basically brings it all together, where the students are actually talking with each other and kind of summarizing and debriefing based on their own research. So they're talking about the research. They're basically saying, they're giving feedback on the research. They're discussing how different points of view can change your own point of view. So it really connects those pieces and allows them to critically think about their own point of view and kind of debate very important issues. The last part is basically prepping for the student product. And at the end of each unit, I feel like it's very important for your students to produce a product and not just take an assessment. Assessments are very one-tracked, very utilize rote memorization. It doesn't really give students the critical thinking skills that are necessary for them to be able to really grasp the information that you're learning in your class. So they're basically coming up with a product. If it's a podcast, a blog, a presentation, any of those things that really shows and builds the skills that they need in order to present information to a group. And then the final step is basically producing the product and presenting the product. So in the class, students are able to share their research with other students and be able to ask critical questions about the research that they've done. Each student also is responsible for providing feedback for their performance for their product. And this also helps students be able to improve on the next time they create a product or present information, so that they know exactly what they need to do in order to be successful. Now, the purpose of a product is not to penalize students. It's a learning opportunity. So grades are not heavily weighted on the performance-based assessment, and you can spread out the grades pretty evenly if you have more than one. And it's meant to practice, because it's an important skill that they need to develop. And if, if the rubric is really, coming after the student and really not addressing the issues that they need to improve, then it's not going to be helpful to them in the long run. So it's really meant to help the student grow as a learner, and really understand what the content is. So the lesson planning piece is very important. And when you engage with students during this time through the lesson plans, as a teacher, you're acting as a facilitator. You are not standing in front of the classroom giving a lecture on the material. You are engaging with the students, asking them critical questions, providing them with critical resources for them to actually look through and read through and kind of grasp an understanding from that information. And I find that these skills are very important for our students nowadays to be able to critically think about the things that are happening in our world and the information that they are learning. So all of these kind of tips will help students become more engaged in your lessons and really understand what you're teaching them, and also make the class a lot better. The key part of classroom management is actually being able to connect with your students and having your students engaged in your lessons. If you don't have a basis for the relationship or the engagement, then the classroom management piece is going to be a lot harder for you as a teacher. And I am a big advocate of utilizing methods of building a relationship with the student as opposed to implementing consequences for behavior. And I'll talk more about that in later on videos. But in this video, I really wanted to focus on going through how to engage your students. So I'm just going to do a little bit of review. So the first point is that you create student surveys for your students in the beginning of the year, so that you can understand what types of things your students like. Another thing is formulate relationships with your students, and really be able to connect with them outside of the classroom. Maybe that's the main space to do that, and inside the classroom. The third thing is creating a student-centered lesson plans for them to be able to engage and critically think in your classroom. And I have provided the student-centered lesson plans right below this video for you to download, as well as the rubric for the student products. So any questions that you have about this method of teaching, or you have any more questions or suggestions about engagement in the classroom, please leave a comment below and I will get back to you. And I would love to hear your comments and your feedback. Thank you for tuning into this video, and I hope it was helpful for you.